Hey guys, so I wanted to come on here and do just a lecture on China, on 20th century China. We talked about the USSR and kind of went through that roller coaster for the Cold War. And so now I want to focus on China and, kind of look at what is going on there as well. So basically we've got the Qing dynasty, we've got, the Manchus are in power, and there's definitely some issues and some tension. Now we are going kind of way back. If you guys remember, like Kangxi and Qinglong, they brought in Christianity, and then they expelled Christianity, and then we've been going through all of these kind of issues of like, do we modernize, do we westernize, do we keep traditions? What do we do? And so when you're coming into the 20th century, they got to do something because imperialism is huge right now, and industrial revolution happened, now imperialism, now we have the European nations knocking at the door of China. And so what do we do? And so we're going to be kind of looking at some stuff that we've already talked about, and then we're going to get into how Mao comes to power. So the rise of communism, the introduction of communism in China. Okay, so as you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on in the 20th century in China. So, bear with me. So you guys, while I'm doing this, you guys are going to be in your at-home lessons, going through, all of these slides. Okay, so that's where you guys are going to be. Alrighty. So we've talked about the Boxer Rebellion a little bit already, and hopefully this is kind of a review for you guys. But if you remember, because of Christians and foreigners coming into China, you had a group of individuals that were not very happy that the Christians and foreigners are in there. And so you have the Society of the Righteous Harmonious Fist. If you guys remember, we watched that little video on this. And basically, they wanted to get rid of all Christians, all foreigners. And so they kind of just start murdering them. And, they are supported by Empress Dowager Shiji. If you remember, she is kind of in power. She is with these reforms and the self-strengthening movement and all of that. So you have the Boxers, and so basically what ends up happening is like the foreigners are going to kind of come in and they're going to stop this rebellion from happening, which is not very good, because what ends up happening is you have things like the open door policy that are going to start. And this is not just, European nations. United States is going to be part of this as well. And so you do see an increased involvement in China. And they're starting to get more like not just having a whole sphere of influence. They're starting to really kind of get into the nitty gritty, of the economy and the government and society and whatnot. Now, you do have some people in the United States that are going to not be all for this. If you remember, during the Opium Wars, there was a few things that happened because of that. You had ports that were opened. You had China had to pay some money, and then you also had this whole extraterritoriality rights, where the people, if you're living in China, they didn't have to abide by the rules in China. So John Hay, who was the Secretary of State at the time, he says, okay, let's not do that. If we're going to live in China, we need to really abide by their rules. And then he's also, winning more free trade in China, and, just kind of like more capitalism, let things, kind of flow as they should. Because what's going on is you're having the European nations that are kind of monopolizing everything. And they, United States, we want a part of it. We want to be part of this, thing. And so he basically says, like, we need free trade and we need to stop kind of these monopolies that are happening. Okay. So then what ends up happening is you have the Russo-Japanese War, which is a huge thing. So if you guys remember, Japan's going to go through their Meiji Restoration. they're going to industrialize, they're going to westernize, and then they're going to start imperializing. And so they're starting to kind of spread. And this is a huge, huge thing, because everybody's like, well, Russia, they're huge, so of course they're going to win. And so this was kind of like Japan's claim to fame. And what ends up happening is, you have Japan that is kind of moving itself on the mainland. But what ends up happening is at the end of the war, there is the Treaty of Portsmouth, which basically is, luckily, it's going to be mediated by Theodore Roosevelt. And so he is still like, wanting to kind of keep United States in this and not let like Japan just kind of take over everything. And so he's going to kind of manipulate it a little bit more where Japan just can't like go on into China or into Manchuria. Because what he's afraid of is like Japan's going to go up to Manchuria and then make their way down to Japan. And then it's going to limit, United States and the Europeans' access to Japan, which kind of happens. And so he's going to, really try to kind of maneuver his, what's going to actually happen. Okay, so now let's kind of get into what's going on in China. So you've got some issues going on in China. You have some tensions, and so we're going to have this whole like struggle for future. What's going to happen? What is China going to look like? And so the first thing you're going to have is you're going to have the Revolution of 1911. So what this is basically you have people who are not happy with the Qing rule. So you remember you have the Manchus who are in power, but Manchus are not Chinese. And so now you have this whole Manchu versus Han, who should be the dominant, people in China who should be running the government. And so you definitely have some tensions. And then you throw on top of that, when people are hungry and you've got famine going on, then they're really not going to be happy. Their economy is bad. The European nations are in there. So they're not really feeling like their own. They're not feeling like they are like controlling themselves. And so you have like an increased tension just in China, which is basically going to, kind of split China and split the people. So you have, people like this guy named Sun Yat-sen is going to come in and he's going to kind of say, well, we need to change these things, and people need more of a say, and we need to unite as Chinese, and we need to help each other. We need to look at us citizens as a whole and like help each other as a whole. And if you're kind of like thinking this kind of sounds like communism, yeah, because he's going to be, even though his whole idea is like people have a say, he definitely wants to help the people. So you got a revolution going on. So because of that, China is dealing with some stuff. Then you bring in World War One, and so China is like, well, you know what, I really need to like just kind of be a part of this. Not necessarily that they wanted to get involved in the war, but they just felt like maybe if we help out during World War One, maybe, we'll have some Europeans that will get out of here. And so they're going to support the Allies. And, they're really kind of looking to become a bigger world power and have a bigger say in, foreign politics. And so they kind of are like, all right, we'll support you, but we need supplies. Like, we can't do this on our own. We obviously are not as industrialized. We're not really ready for this. But if we do this, can we have this, this, and this? Like, can you return our territory? Can we end the unequal treaties and whatnot? And so the Allies are like, oh, sure, yeah, not a problem. Sounds wonderful. And so World War One happens. Now, at the Paris Peace Conference, you basically have Japan that is allowed to keep, the territory that they had taken during the Russo-Japanese War. And the Chinese are like, whoa, like, that's not okay. Like, they are still going to, potentially like imperialize. And so, China is not good. So add World War One and the increased tensions, you're going to end up with a civil war on your hands. Okay, now there's two political parties that are going to be fighting during this civil war. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go back and forth between these. And so again, if you guys are looking, you should be on, where are we? I think we're on this one right here. Okay. Alrighty. So we have two political parties. We have the KMT, or this thing I cannot pronounce, the KMT. They are going to be supported. Their leader is Chiang Kai-shek. Okay. Chiang Kai-shek, he is more conservative. He has the Chinese National Party, but he's more conservative, but he's going to really kind of like suppress and free speech, and he's very corrupt and whatnot. And so you're going to have more conservative people that are going to kind of team up with him. Sorry about the bell. Then on the other side, you're going to have the Chinese Communist Party, and that's going to be led by Mao Zedong. And obviously, we know that Mao is going to end up winning this fight. Okay, so he creates the People's Liberation Army. The big thing is the Long March, and the Long March is you're coming from Fujian right here in the south, and then you're traveling all the way up here. Okay, now this is basically because the communists, the CCP, they're going to be expelled from southern part of China. And so they're like, fine, we'll just go up to the northern part of China and we'll establish ourselves. Now, the problem with this long march was not easy. Okay, you can see only 10,000 people are going to end up surviving, like mass starvation. That's going to happen, horrible conditions. And so it is not good at all. Okay, so Mao Zedong, the communist, the CCP, the Communist Party guy, and then Chiang Kai-shek, he's the nationalist, the KMT, the Nationalist Party guy. So we got a civil war going on. Okay, so now you have in the south, you have the KMT, and then in the north is the CCP. Now, let's kind of bring Japan back into this. All right, so we have, here's China, here's Manchuria, okay, and then, so we have Japan that's coming over, or it should be backwards for you. Here, let's do this. Here's China, and then here's Manchuria, and then the Japanese are going to be coming over. Now they've already gone against the Russians once, and then they got some territory. Now what they're looking to do is to invade Manchuria, invade that part in the northern part of China. Now, what they do is they basically blow up one of their railroads and railroad cars, and then they go, this was the Chinese, this is the Chinese, blah, blah, blah. And so they, justify that we have to move into Manchuria to protect ourselves. And so Manchuria gets taken over, and they kind of turn into this little like puppet country of Japan. And, if you do what we want, everything will be okay. So this is during the same time that like Hitler is starting to kind of move into his nations. 1932, he's starting to, not quite yet, he's not, the appeasement hasn't happened yet, but he's starting to now take power in Germany. If you guys remember that video that we watched looking at what's going on in Europe and Japan, so we have Japanese that have now invaded Manchuria. Then they're going to go to war with the Russians again. So you have this Marco Polo Bridge incident, which is basically like they want to get into this town because they believe one of their soldiers there, and then the people won't let them, and so then an open fire ends up happening, and like there's this little like shoot out that ends up happening. So then they continue down into China. This is when the rape of Nanking happens. You have about 300,000 men, women, and children, mainly women and children, that are murdered during this time. About 80,000 women were raped during this time. It's probably one of the worst, massacres that has happened. Just very atrocious. The Chinese do not like to talk, or excuse me, the Japanese do not like to talk about it. And it's just kind of like this really horrible part in history. Okay, so now that ends up happening, we are like have the outbreak of World War II. And so you have this whole like Asia for Asiatics, where they're really trying to push the Europeans out of Asia. Okay, now this is going to happen pretty quickly. And one of the ways, because they're kind of focusing on like World War II, and then like Japan's just kind of like going to move into Southeast Asia pretty quickly. So while the Japanese are doing this, what they're going to do is they have this Unit 731, which is basically biological and chemical weapon research and testing. Like, hey, let's drop this like capsule of this plague in this little bomb plague thing over a Chinese city, and let's see if we can, release the plague. And guess what? It happens. And so you have all this biological and chemical research that's happening, and so it's not good. It's not good. So lots of things going on. Okay, so a little recap: we've got some tensions because of the Manchus. We've got the civil war that breaks out. We've got the KMT and the CCP. Chiang Kai-shek and Mao have kind of started this thing. Now we've got tensions with Japan and moving in, and so it's not good. So civil war, guess what? It's still going on. But what's going on now is the KMT is now going to use the Japanese in hopes that they can kind of like stop the communist expansion. Because remember, the USSR is also like knocking at the door of China, and then you've got the CCP that is obviously communist. So what they're kind of doing is like squashing the KMT. So they leave. They're like, okay, we can't do this. They retreat to China. And you have the USSR that has kind of moved in, and they are starting to kind of really support the CCP, which now you have the People's Republic of China. Mao wins. Okay, Mao wins the civil war. Communism is started in China. So let's look at them in the Cold War. What's going on? Korea, Korea's right by Japan, and so they really kind of are nervous about, like the war continuing into China, and so they are really trying to kind of like stop that from happening and support where they can. But then what ends up happening even more is like, even though the Soviet Union and China are both communist, they don't necessarily agree on the same type of communism. And so you're going to have some tensions and some border skirmishes and, some issues, because China basically wants what the Soviet Union wants, which is to become a big world power, but do things a little bit differently. Where the Soviet Union, like, it's a lot of government intervention and a lot of government help. China really believes that it's the people that have to do all of the work and to make it equal, not necessarily the government coming in and doing it. So really, China is going for more of like the pure communism, where the Soviet Union is going for like Soviet communism. Okay, so Mao is in power, and so one of his big things is the Great Leap Forward. Okay, it's very much like Stalin's 5-year plan. The stuff that you're going to hear with land reform and agriculture, industrialization, guess what? It's like the same thing, and guess what? The outcomes are like the same thing. And so you have this land reform, which AKA collective farming. It says like commune state-owned agricultural communities. Hello, that's collective farming. That's taking land away from the people and then creating these big farms and then having people on them. And then you remember those like wealthy farmers in the Soviet Union that didn't like that, and then they got sent to the gulags. Well, guess what? Same thing happens in China. They get sent to these like re-education camps or death. But there is protest that ends up happening. And then guess what? Industrialization. That sounds just like the 5-year plan. And so you have these steel mills that literally pop up everywhere. Like, and that's why it says perfect addition to my any backyard, because you'll just start having all of these steel factories like pop up, and people are like, what is going on? And they're also going to take over some agricultural land. So hello, that's going to cause more issues. And so you're going to end up in a famine, probably the worst famine in world history. And in fact, like, they are still exporting things, even though they don't, like, let's say crops like fail, they don't want to look like their country is not producing enough. And so they just keep exporting, even though their people have nothing to eat. So literally 20 million people are dying. I've heard up, to even 40 million people dying, but 20 million is usually the one that's out there. Another way that Mao is controlling is with his Cultural Revolution. Okay, he has these little red guards. All these dictators have like these little youth guards, youth soldiers, and so he has these red guards, and they're students, they're young people, they're revolutionary, they want change, they want to, be part of history. And so you have them, they carry around these little red books that have Mao's sayings and, inspirational quotes from him. And the government is pretty much seizing everything. All the government officials have to abide by Mao or seize teachers. If you're not teaching exactly what you should, you are gone. And you're sent to these re-education, countryside re-education camps. Pretty much lots of physical labor where you're going to die. Okay. And so then you've got cultural propaganda. Propaganda is huge. Oh, look, Mao was amazing. I love him. He's awesome. Look, we're so industrialized and we're going to stomp on all these stupid people down here. Okay. Well, guess what? Mao ends up dying because he wants to show people that he's like really athletic, and he goes like swimming. I don't remember what river it is. Might be the Yellow River. I can't remember. But he basically dies because of that. And so then you have Deng Xiaoping that comes into power. And Deng Xiaoping is like, okay, Mao, you didn't do things, totally bad, but we definitely need to change some things. So he has these 4 modernizations. He says, I want to focus on the economy. I want to focus on agriculture. I want to focus on science, technological development, and national defense. The first 2 is, pretty standard. That's been Great Leap Forward, 5-year plan. But when you're getting into the scientific and technological development, this is when China really starts to kind of take off. And also the national defense, because they're kind of tired of being like the people that are just left behind. And so, you know what, we got to spend a lot of money, to help us kind of become this big world power. And this really kind of starts it. Now you have a rapid growing population because of all of this development. We went from having a huge famine to now a huge population increase. And so they're reaching almost 1 billion. And so basically you have this one child policy, which sends them into this dark hole of like having way too many men in China because men are favored. And so there was the infanticide that was going on, where they would kill their their first daughter, in hopes that they could have a son. And so you had some really bad things going on during Deng Xiaoping. And then you have Tiananmen Square. So basically you have a lot of people that are coming to Tiananmen Square, and they are demanding democratic reforms. Okay, people say like, you need this 5th modernization, not just these 4 modernizations. You need this 5th modernization, which is democracy. And so you have these types of protests that are going on all over. Because look at this date. You got the end of the Cold War. Okay, you've got Soviet Union is coming down, like they're starting to fall. And so you have all of these nations that are wanting to become self-sovereign and become democratic nations. And so like these young people are like, we want that too. And so that you have this huge movement in Tiananmen Square. And so Deng Xiaoping declares martial law, sends in the army to stop this. And then you've got Tank Man, which you probably have kind of like heard of this guy. Nobody actually knows who he is specifically. And it's this guy, like you had all these tanks that were coming down into Tiananmen Square, and he just like has his groceries and like walks up to these tanks and like climbs on it, and he's like, get out of here, get out of here. And so I'll link this so you guys can watch it. It's awesome. It's kind of a cool story. But when you're in China, because censorship is so big, like Tiananmen Square, you can't find it on the internet. But okay, that was China in the 20th century. That was a lot of information, and I hope I didn't overwhelm you guys too much. And if you have any questions, let me know. I'll see you guys tomorrow.